When you think of the god of war, what comes to mind? Bloodlust, unbridled rage, the brutal, chaotic heart of battle, or testosterone if he was a person? For many, that's the complete picture of Ares. The truth is far more complex. Ares is one of the 12 great Olympian gods, the son of the king and queen of the pantheon, Zeus and Hera. And yes, he is the god of war, but in the world of Greek mythology, he represents a very specific type of war, the violent, physical, and untamed aspect of it. He's the furious scream of the frontline troops, the clash of bronze on bronze, the smell of sweat and blood. This stands in contrast to his own half sister Athena, the goddess of wisdom, warfare, and handicraft. She too was a deity of war, but she represented military strategy, disciplined tactics, and generalship. When Athena was the sophistication of the intellectual mind, Ares was the primal, raw, overwhelming force of instincts. And this is a crucial point. The ancient Greeks were deeply ambivalent towards him. They understood that the physical aggression he embodied was necessary for success in war, but they also feared him. He was a dangerous, overwhelming force that was insatiable in battle. His bloodlust knew no bounds. They didn't ask him for help. They unleashed him and tried not to get in his way. Statues to Ares in Sparta were often in chains, both to keep his strength and courage in the city, but also to contain the destruction he could unleash. Other cities and towns had this practice, not just with him but with other deities, but the specifics and the ritualism varied very widely. Contrary to popular belief, he did not have a major cult in Sparta, and in fact Athena had a stronger cult there. This said, Ares was viewed as the epitome of everything a soldier needed to be in the din of battle. When it came to the patron god of Apollos, a city-state of ancient Greece, Athena is far more suitable than Ares. Athena is a protector of cities and civilization, but Ares destroys them. Ares is famously known as the lover of Aphrodite, the goddess of love herself, who was married to the brilliant but deformed craftsman Hephaestus, the god of smithing. But even in this, Ares often found himself the punchline. Why he plays a limited role in Greek mythology overall, when he does appear, it's typically to face contempt. Not that he really gives a damn about what others think of him, but Ares is both feared and hated by his fellow Olympians, who commonly try to undermine him and mock him due to their dislike of his inherent, chaotic, and merciless nature. In what is probably his most famous story, his brother Hephaestus, tired of their affair, forged an unbreakable, invisible net. He trapped Ares and Aphrodite in bed, naked and on the job, and they invited all the other gods to come and laugh at their predicament. Not exactly the fearsome image we have today, although depending on the version of this myth, Ares doesn't really seem to care, and he then jogs on to his birthplace, Thrace, I like to think because he just couldn't be asked for the drama. It didn't end their physical relationship, which largely symbolizes the primal, procreative, magnetic attraction between masculinity and femininity, as ancient Greeks understood those concepts. This complicated perception becomes even clearer when we look at his Roman counterpart, Mars. Now, it's tempting to think that they're one and the same god, with a different name, but they couldn't be more different. Mars was revered in Rome. He was the father of the Roman people, a protector of the city. He was much more calm and collected. This gave him a calmer, more dignified and understanding demeanor, even a fatherly demeanor. So Mars and Ares are better understood as counterparts, not copies. They reveal how differently their cultures viewed the very nature of war. And I suppose it should be unsurprising that the Romans had a little bit more of a glorified version of war. So we have this picture in the Hellenic mythology of a brutal, powerful, feared, disrespected, and often mocked god, whose own family were weary of him and whose mortal worshippers saw him as the epitome of a mixed bag. But is that the whole story? Is he just a one-dimensional brute? A Grim Reaper-like entity that just performs the Olympus annual human cult? Well, no. He is not a good force, although he does have some qualities we would all like, such as strength and fearlessness. But he isn't evil either. I think the best way to see him is not immoral, but amoral. Ares doesn't do sides, ideology, or countries, or tribes. War, in the sense as Ares embodies it, is a force of nature. Ares is like a tsunami, earthquake, or plague. It's horrible, yeah, but holding it to human morality is just pointless, and it doesn't change the reality of humans having to take part in the great evolutionary game that in many ways Ares champions. Even under this light though, the image is still of a mindless, heartless god of destruction. But this is where, in my opinion, it gets interesting, and Ares shows a lot of surprising actions, in my opinion, and makes him a far better dad than the majority of the other gods of Olympus. Also, in many ways, much better in his treatment of women than many of the other Olympian gods. There is this one story, one ancient myth, that shows a completely different, extremely rare side to the god of war and slaughter. A story where he isn't the aggressor, but the avenger of his daughter's dignity and the defendant in a trial. It's a story of a father's rage, a quest for justice, and the very first murder trial according to the mythology. It's the story of the trial of Ares. But before we get into that, to truly understand Ares and the trial that would set a precedent for mortals, we have to look at his family. Because in the divine soap opera that is Mount Olympus, family is both everything and family is driving you mad. Ares boasts a lineage that is pure Olympian elite. He is the son of Zeus, the king of the gods, and Hera, the formidable queen of heaven and goddess of marriage. This wasn't some side affair that we all know and love Zeus for. Ares was a legitimate heir, born to the ruling couple of the pantheon. But in this case, a golden cradle doesn't guarantee a happy home. His mother, Hera, had a complicated relationship with him. While frustrated by her husband's constant infidelities, she does seem somewhat protective of her son. But don't mistake this for him being a mummy's boy either, because he couldn't be further from it. More often than not, Hera was embarrassed and exasperated by Ares' brutal nature, which causes countless problems. Although I would also point out, I would say it would cause far less problems than Zeus not keeping it in his toga, but that's just me. And then there is his father Zeus. You'd think that being one of the two only legitimate sons of Zeus would earn him some points, but you'd be wrong. Zeus, who was always obsessed with maintaining cosmic order, openly despised his son's bloodthirsty ways, and quite famously in the Iliad tells Ares that he is his most hateful of all his children. For his part, Ares seems to return the sentiment to some degree. He never tried to overthrow his father, yes, a popular and dangerous pastime in Greek mythology, but he also never seemed to care what Zeus thought of him. He would even defy his father's will, most famously during the Trojan War when he went head to head with his sister. This brings us to the ultimate sibling rivalry, Ares' older sister, Athena. She was the goddess of wisdom and strategy. He was the god of physical aggression and savagery. She was constantly and consistently Zeus's favourite child, so much so that he famously birthed her himself, fully formed from his own head, which is a story in of itself. This rivalry came to a head twice during the Trojan War, and both times, despite Ares having the edge in raw, brutal power, Athena won. I think her victory there proves that fighting smart and with a cool head always triumphs over fighting hard and with primal rage. Interestingly, though, although they are known mostly for like their rivalry in terms of their relationship, they aren't always enemies. When the giants in Greek mythology attempted to overthrow Olympus, Ares and Athena fought side by side, a unified front against a common threat. And personally, I would have given anything to see that. It symbolizes, I think, for the sake of family and for the sake of dynasty, two bitter rivals put aside their differences when the fate of Olympus is at stake. I suppose it also shows that Ares knows how to kind of put a vendetta aside uh, when it really counts. After Aphrodite's inevitable divorce, she and Ares stayed together. They were very productive, unsurprising considering she's the goddess of procreation and he's the god of virality. Together, they had children who perfectly embodied their union. There was Phobos, the personification of fear. There was Deimos, the personification of terror. They were both Ares' constant companions in battle, constantly following Daddy into, well, hell. Aphrodite and Ares also had the Erotes, the winged gods of love. And in a beautiful and highly symbolic stroke of irony, the god of war and the goddess of love also produced a daughter named Harmonia. Harmony, born from conflict and passion. Interestingly, for all their passion and their many children, they never married. There's not one myth that I know of that portrays them as actually being a married couple. Theirs was a relationship that defied convention, much like Ares himself. So this is the god we see on the eve of his trial. Not just a mindless brute, but a legitimate prince with a disapproving father, a warrior with a brilliant rival sister, a passionate partner to the goddess of love, and the father to both terror, fear, and harmony. His life was a web of conflict, passion, and contradiction. And it was a conflict much closer to home that would lead him to stand trial for the first time in mythological history. It all began not on a bloody battlefield, but in the heart of Athens. Ares had a mortal daughter, Alcebe. Her mother was Algrolos, a princess from the royal house of Athens itself, daughter of the city's very first king, Cecrops. Alcebe was both Athenian royalty and a demi-goddess. Her father was a god, and not just any god, but specifically the god you really don't want to cross. One day, near a spring on the shores of the city, her peace was shattered. A man named Halirrhothios, the son of the mighty sea god Poseidon, and therefore Ares' own cousin, came upon Alcebe. Overcome with lust, he attempted to violate her. But Halirrhothios was not alone. Ares, the god of war, was watching. And what happened next was not the calculated move of a deity, but pure instinctual fury of both a father and a war machine. He erupted. In a flash of divine rage, Ares unleashed the full brutal force of his domain upon his daughter's attacker. He slew Halirrhothios on the spot. The way I imagine it, he probably tore him to pieces with his bare hands, and I doubt he made it quick. There was no hesitation, no fear of the consequences. In that moment, he wasn't just the god of war. He was also just a father protecting his child with savage finality. It's important to remember, when thinking about this myth, that Poseidon definitely outranks his nephew. When it comes to the hierarchy of the pantheon, obviously you have Zeus at the tippy top, you have Hera, and then you have Poseidon and Hades, the brothers of Zeus and Hera. And I suspect Ares is thought of to have been very aware of that, but just doesn't care. He just could not give less of a sugar, shall we say. He is just filled with hate and anger for what he's just witnessed happen to his child, and there's just no way his cousin's going to live. He's never going to allow that. His cousin's going to die, no matter what. Doesn't matter what the consequences are. And that's very Aries. It couldn't be more Aries. But I would also say that would be many fathers, just not caring about the consequences. If someone who is very well connected attempts to inflict such violence upon who I'm guessing is probably something like a 15-year-old girl, considering the context of the time. But the consequences were severe. Poseidon, god of earthquakes and oceans, was enraged by the death of his son. He didn't see a justified act. He saw the murder of his king and demanded justice for his son. I would like to point out at this point that Halirrhothios, being a violator, it's very much the apple not falling far from the tree, because Poseidon has his own terrible history of violation too, as Medusa, and that's a myth we'll cover another time. But yeah, like father, like son. I can also imagine Zeus was probably, when he confronted Ares about it, like, oh, you disappoint me. And Ares, I can just imagine giving him 2 middle fingers saying, well, I'm happy to disappoint you, Dad. So I like to think of that as my little headcanon. But, and so, for the first time in mythological history, a god was put on trial for murder. The first ever murder trial. The court was assembled on a rocky hill overlooking Athens, with the great Olympian gods themselves serving as the jury. Poseidon laid out his case, accusing Ares of being a bloodthirsty killer. All eyes turned on the god of war, and everyone expected the hot-headed, violent god to explode with rage. He did not. Ares stood before his peers and showed no remorse, no regret, showed complete pride in his actions. He did not apologize for the death of Poseidon's son. Instead, he vehemently, passionately expressed his right to retribution. His right to avenge his daughter's honor. But then he did something that no one expected from the god of mindless violence. He didn't just rely on his own fury, he demanded a fair process. He demanded the gods examine the evidence. And most importantly, he demanded that they speak to his daughter, Alcippe. Ares rested his case on the testimony of the victim, his daughter. He was telling the most powerful beings in the cosmos, don't just listen to me, a powerful god. Don't just listen to Poseidon, a powerful god. Listen to the mortal girl, well, a demigoddess, who was wronged, who was dishonored and defiled by a monster. The gods, just as surprisingly as Ares' attitude in this trial, actually did listen. They heard Alcippe's testimony. They weighed the crime of Halirrhothios against the brutal reaction of Ares. The verdict came down, and Ares was acquitted. His actions were deemed not malicious murder, but the justified defense of his child and her honor. This wasn't a story of humiliation, like the one with Aphrodite's net. This was a story of vindication, and it had a legacy. That rocky hill in Athens, the site of the first ever murder trial, would be forever known as the Areopagus, the Hill of Ares. It became the very place where the ancient Athenians would hold their highest courts to decide matters of justice for centuries to come. And it's a very real physical place. You can go there. Just Google it, or if you happen to be in the Athens area, just go and have a walk up there. It is a big life kind of goal of mine to one day stand on top of the hill. I heard the view is just utterly breathtaking. The god of mindless violence had not just become the unlikely founder of a legal justice, The Trial of Ares is, to me, one of my all-time favorite Greek mythology stories. Now, I've been reading Greek mythology since I was very, very young. One of my earliest memories of ever hearing about Greek mythology was when I was a child and I heard the story of the Minotaur. And my two favorite deities in Greek mythology are Athena and close second Ares. And Ares, he really does get a bad rap in my opinion, but he is very surprising if you get into the nitty gritty. Again, he isn't a good person. I think that's very, very obvious. But he has a very weird protectiveness to him when it comes to women in general. You have his daughter Alcippe, who he avenges. You also have his daughters, the Amazonians. The Amazonians, or Amazons, really, I should say. They are very much like their father. They don't do pretty dresses or perfume. They're going around in the wilds, going to war. In fact, a queen of the Amazons even went toe to toe with Achilles during the Trojan War. The god of mindless violence had just become the unlikely founder of legal justice, and it proves that even in the heart of the most brutal, ruthless god, there is a fierce, unwavering, and dare I say, even righteous love. And I think most surprisingly, I mean, Greek mythology, especially the male gods, it's just full of them forcing themselves on helpless women. Poseidon, in my opinion, and obviously Zeus being one of the two biggest perpetrators, and pretty much all of them have a bad track record there. There's at least one version of a myth where it's clear, the mortal woman is not willing, or even divine woman is not willing. Uh, but I don't know any of Ares doing that. There is one of Mars, the Roman god of war, doing that, but I can't actually find anything where Ares does that. Um, and it's weird because you would expect Ares to be like, if he's the god of war, to be like the number one toxic male, but he's not. He's not at all. And in fact, the only myth that I know where obviously violation comes into it, he's the avenging, righteous, furious father, ripping his daughter's attacker to shreds. And I just find that fascinating. It's one of the reasons I'm a little bit more sympathetic to him than I probably otherwise would be. But yeah, this was more or less a more laid back video. We'll be getting back into what I usually do uh, probably later in the week. I'm going to try and make 2 videos this week. This one is just to kind of share my love of Greek mythology because, much like, military mysteries, submarines, naval warfare, and military history in general, I don't have many people I get to talk to about it, so consider YouTube my surrogate in that regard. Lastly, I was extremely overwhelmed by the response to my previous video about K129. It was just wonderful. I don't know how I got lucky in the algorithm, but 90% of all the comments I got were just so kind and constructive, and that blew me away because YouTube comments aren't really known for that. So, and I can't get over the view count. I really can't. And I've got over 400 subscribers now, which goes beyond any goal I set myself, if I'm being honest. I really appreciated all your constructive criticisms. I've made actually a little list for myself to just keep improving, save up for better equipment, that type of thing. Um, and I'm just really, really, really happy that people feel that I'm worth listening to. Don't know why, but I'm deeply grateful for it. And I pledge to keep getting better as I go and to get more experience in this. So, yeah, everybody, this is Gob Scholar signing off, and I will see you later in the week. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye.